our regular business, Council Paper 11,272. This is Mayor's Communication number 46, requesting Judy Grinnell of the Hoosick River Revival to give an update on that steering committee. Without objection, I will file this communication and allow Ms. Grinnell to have the floor. Well, Mayor, did you want to introduce this, please?
Sure.
Okay.
I can go from here.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Judy, for coming and for bringing your guests and bringing this presentation. As you know, this project's been going on now for 4 years, and it's been building more and more momentum, getting further and further into preliminary design type stuff and all these different things that the group is working on. So, Judy and I were discussing the fact that this is probably just an opportune time. We're at a point where it's a good time to provide an update to the council and to the community so that folks can see where this project stands. So with that, Judy, thank you for being here tonight.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you all very much. I know you have a lot on your agenda, and we will try to zip through this. As much as we love it, we're going to try to move along fast. So our work is to connect the community again with the river while maintaining flood protection. And we were launched on this endeavor 4 years ago with the endorsement of former Mayor Barrett, and we're very pleased to have support from the current mayor. As you will see from the PowerPoint, many people have been involved in this. But tonight, I have with me 4 people who have been working with us. Standing here is Cindy Del Papa from the Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration. That entity in Massachusetts considers this project a priority project for the state, and they have been very supportive in many ways. Also with us are 2 consultants, Jim McBroom on the left, who is Vice President of Malone and McBroom, a 200-person consulting firm focusing on river restoration and landscape design. And to his right is Mark Aragoni, who is a landscape architect with that firm, and they have been working with us most recently. So we're going to start with Cindy talking about the river, and then I will talk about the work that we have done in the community. The 2 gentlemen will give us a presentation of their current suggestions for what we might do to bring the river back to life, and then we will talk about what's next. So, Cindy?
Mr. President, it might be helpful to dim one set of lights.
Yep, when you're ready for the PowerPoint, we'll put all set.
Whoops. Ahead of myself. So this is the Hoosick River watershed. The South Branch, the main stem, starts in Cheshire, but the North Branch starts in southern Vermont. And what you should understand about a watershed is that it's all of the landmass that drains to a common point. So what's in the Hoosick River is all the rain or water or snow melt that's coming off from most of southern Vermont and Adams and Cheshire, all draining towards North Adams, and then it goes on to Williamstown and eventually into the Hudson and Long Island Sound. Here in North Adams, the river has been highly engineered. Flood chutes were built as well as earthen berms to contain the river. So it's a very unnatural system. In the bermed area, it kind of looks like a river, but in the flood chute area, it doesn't. This is directly upstream of the chutes in the North Branch. It looks like a river. And unfortunately, the river was channelized because of the floods. And in the 30s, there was some devastating floods throughout New England. And in response, the community asked the federal government to help contain the flood damage. And their response way back then was to build physical structures that prevented the water from flowing into its natural floodplain. So we have here a giant concrete sluiceway that's at a very prescribed slope that moves the water very swiftly and efficiently out of the river and does protect the city from floods. But it also destroys all river habitat and aspects that make a river a river. This section of the Hoosick is considered impaired under the Federal Clean Water Act as designated by the state of Massachusetts. It's on the 303D list, or impaired waters list. And one of the contributing factors to that impairment is this engineered modification. So the chutes are a mixed blessing. They help prevent floods, but they do degrade the river. They do bisect the city. And they are very helpful in preventing floods. We certainly saw that during the remnants of Tropical Storm Irene, where the flood chutes on the South Branch filled up a little bit more than halfway. On the North Branch, because there was so much rain in southern Vermont, all draining towards us, they filled up to 2/3, 3/4 full. So they serve their purpose, but they are getting old. They are made of concrete. Concrete doesn't last forever. They are now several generations old. They're approaching 60 or 70 years. And, Mylone and McBroom have looked at the chutes. They have assessed their quality. They're in fair to middling shape. But it seems a good idea to now start thinking about what is going to happen as these physical structures start to degrade. And if we have a lot more Irene-type storms, all that pounding is really going to age them even more quickly. And what's interesting is when the Corps built all these flood control structures all across the country, they made no provisions for what to do when the structures met their designed end of life. There is no promise within the agreements that the Army Corps would pay to repair or replace these flood chutes. So it is unknown at this point in time whether the federal government will come up with the many, many billions of dollars, probably, to replace the many flood structures that the Army Corps put in the 40s and 50s and 60s. So it seems like a good idea now to start thinking about what we should be doing. And a lot of people have paved the way. There is a lot of activity around urban areas where they are trying to reclaim their rivers, both to make their rivers healthier, but also to make their communities more livable and economically viable. They have made the rivers this focus point of their cities. Maybe some of you have been to Providence, Rhode Island for Water Fire. It draws literally tens of thousands of people every summer for these great festivals they have. You can ride gondola boats. This river was once totally underground. They brought it back to the surface. And here, more close to North Adams, sort of, is Fitchburg, where they took down part of their Army Corps flood wall, and they created this beautiful park and access point to the river. And they also did some river habitat improvements. So there's fish back in this stretch of the river. And Los Angeles is probably a little bit ahead of us, but they have exactly the same size chutes, or same sort of chutes. They were built at literally the same time. They're the same design. And they've been working for several years to reimagine what their flood chutes could look like in using today's technology and today's understanding of how things work.
So, knowing about our river and what other people are doing with the river, we brought people together for a meeting in 2010. We invited the whole city. Almost 100 people came, and they stayed for 6 hours listening to the consultants, discussing what they liked about the river, what they didn't like about the river, how they wanted it changed. And at the end of the meeting, this was the consensus. Basically, North Adams should have a clean river, a flood-controlled river, one that's aesthetically pleasing, and that the river becomes a destination point so it enhances our downtown. And then they gave us specific recommendations on what they wanted us to do, believing that 100 people does not represent everybody in the city. We also had 7 posters like this made, had them around town for 2 to 3 months with a little card that said, "We want your thoughts," and a box to put the card in. And we got all kinds of comments and suggestions from people about the river and about the city and what they wanted to be done. Basically, we started figuring out, as the people had requested, what can North Adams do? But we needed to raise money in order to hire consultants to help us with that answer. But we didn't want people to forget about us while we were raising the money, so we had a website made, a walking brochure. We invited the secretary, the assistant secretary of the Army, who is in charge of all civil works around the world, come. Congressman Oliver invited her, and we spent basically a morning with her. We gave her a trolley ride around town. We have been in touch with the Corps of Engineers since that time. Students at Drury were very interested in the trip we had given Secretary Darcy around town. They wanted to create a film of it so that the community could see it, and it was on community television and shown at the school. We also thought, well, let's raise awareness about the river by having a community garden there. So we now have 2 community gardens, one on River Street and one on Sperry Avenue. The gardens are 2 raised beds in both places. They were designed and built by students at Drury. So we're at the point about 6 months ago when we had raised enough money, we signed a contract with Malone and McBroom, and we began our discussions with them. And we had in mind all the time what the community had said to us 2 years ago and what our goals were to be. And they are flood damage control, revive the ecosystem of the river, create a better quality of life along the river, try to make the designs such that we have economic development, and connect all our cultural and historical features in the city. And we had in mind not only Los Angeles, but we also had in mind Fitchburg, because they are a couple years ahead of us, and these are the kinds of things that they're doing with their river, which is for the most part also in a flood control situation. Art, historical markers, parking, river views, trails. And we're now at the point where we have something we can show you. These are very, very preliminary ideas. No decisions have been made. What we are doing is showing you first what some of these ideas are, and we then will be going around the city to anybody who will invite us and talk about these ideas for the flood chutes and for the corridor. And we will have another big meeting in the spring, just as we did in 2010, and see where the city would like us to go. So, Jim, you want to start? Jim is, as you may recall, the engineer at Malone and McBroom. So his focus is the flood chutes. Jim?
Thank you, Judy. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here and speak with you. And Judy mentioned I'm a hydraulic engineer, and I specialize in the study of rivers, both in terms of flood control, in terms of the recreation potential, and in terms of naturalizing rivers, in terms of the ecosystem. And what we began by doing is first collecting information on the river. We think it was a data collection phase. Then we inspect the river. We inventory the existing conditions along the river and along the flood chutes where it's been modified. Put together base maps that show the physical conditions of the channel based on the aerial photographs and the field walks and plans from the Corps of Engineers. And then we look at what we think of as the hydrology of the river. And the hydrology, just very quickly, is basically the science of how the water moves through the system, beginning with atmospheric water. Some of it soaks into the ground, some of it becomes surface runoff in the river. We look at the quantities of runoff based on gauging stations, and fortunately, The U.S. Geologic Survey does have gauging stations on the south branch of the river down in Adams, as well as on the main branch of the river in Williamstown. And after the hydrology, we then look at what we call the hydraulics of the river. And this is really the study of how water moves through the system, how fast the water moves and how deep the water is going to be and how wide it spreads on the adjacent land, what we call the floodplain. And finally, after looking at the existing conditions to understand how the river works, we look at what the options are. And the options range, and you'll see in just a moment some of the options, but they range from doing nothing, just letting Mother Nature take its course, to maintaining the existing conditions, or to have some kind of intervention to modify the river to help achieve the goals that Judy mentioned just a moment ago. And so we look at these goals and performance of the river from an engineering point of view in terms of both form and process. The river form is really a discussion of the shape and the size of the river. We can change its width, we can change its depth, we can change its slope to a certain degree. We can change its alignment, is it going to be straight, or is it going to be sinuous, or is it going to have riffles and pools, or is it going to have cascades, or is it going to have a flat bed. But we always have to maintain the process. And the processes of this particular river that we're most concerned about are really threefold. The first one is the ability to have conveyance of water. We want to make sure that we carry just as much flood flow as the existing channel does. We don't want to diminish that in any way. And we also want to address sediment, because rivers carry sediment as well as water. And the third process, which is largely absent from this particular river, particularly where it's the man-made flood control project, is the ecological system of the aquatic ecology. And generally the river is more or less sterile. So with that in mind, we have some pictures that you can see here in the upper right is an image of more or less how the flood control project looks. It's a rectangular concrete chute with concrete walls that are about 12 feet high, and typically it's about 45 feet wide. It's a rectangle, and it's designed to carry a great flood flow, similar to what you had in 1936 and 1938, which is before my time. And as a result, it's overly large to carry the normal flow in an efficient manner. So when you see it on a normal day, the water is very shallow, very fast, and very warm. But on the other hand, it can carry a great mass of water during a flood, such as we had in the when we had the remnants of Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Floyd come up the coast. And then on the bottom left, you can see how we have some options here, and this is on the screen in front of you now. And this is a change in form. So this particular type of channel, we would do away with the vertical concrete walls and try to open it up so it has a little bit more people-friendly, and make it more of a playful type of area while maintaining the ability to carry the same amount of water. And so we have to do this carefully because it is a high-velocity channel. We have to maintain proportions to maintain what I call the physical processes of the river, to carry water and to carry sediment. But this is the type of option you see on some more modern types of urban channels, where you can have walkways and bikeways and sitting areas or amphitheaters actually built into the concept of the floodway, which becomes kind of a linear corridor that goes through the community. This is another type of option that could be done, where instead of having vertical concrete walls and the concrete bottom, you could slope the channel banks back. And it makes a wider channel, so it requires a good deal more land. The channel you have is very efficient, uses a very small footprint on the surface of the earth. But this type of channel actually has some ecological potential to it in terms of fisheries, in terms of having aquatic habitat. And then finally, another type of very broad concept that we introduce is there may be some options here to try to lift up the water elevation closer to the ground, make it a little bit more in contact with people. And if you think about the high dam that's just upstream of the Eclipse Mill on the east branch of the river, on the north branch of the river, excuse me, the water drops down into a deep trough, what we call a chute. You could actually skim off some of that water higher up at the dam and have a twin level type of structure so that you have water flowing on the top in just a shallow, normal flow type of situation, close to people. We can communicate with the water and put the flood water underground. We don't need to have that water. So you'd have like a dual type of system. So these are just kind of some of the ideas we were thinking of. And how you apply that really is the next part of the conversation, because it has to be tied in with the social fabric of the community. We can't just take the engineering part in isolation, otherwise we may not gain its full potential. So we work with the landscape architects and urban planners in the office. They actually think in terms of how we connect to the community around it, how we connect to the neighborhood scale. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Aragoni, my coworker.
As Jim said, Mark Aragoni, I'm the landscape architect, and I get to bring all the colorful, funny pictures. We gave Jim the black and white ones, so I hope everybody's boring now. We can look at the colored ones. But Jim's touched on a very interesting topic in that we put a team together. So Jim just gave you some of the background and the technical understanding and the engineering that we know went into the flood chutes, and we now know after seeing what happened in the water that was in the flood chutes after the remnants of Irene came through, how important that is. I think over 20 or 30 years of maybe not getting that much water in there, you tend to forget about how important they are. When we started this phase of the project, very early on, I've been involved in the project for 4 years, so that preceded when the remnants of Irene came through, and you could see the sense and the change in the opinion of the flood chutes. I think prior to Irene, there was more of a attitude of potential to, well, maybe we can live without some of the flood chute walls. But immediately, upon our first meeting when we came back after Irene, you could sense and really see the social change that happened in that. So as part of the team that we put together, we have landscape architects, not just me, several others involved. We had Jim and Jim's staff of hydraulic and hydrologic engineers. We had urban planners, Crosby, Schlesinger, and Smallridge. Carol Schlesinger and Skip Smallridge came out to these meetings. And you saw a little glimpse of one of the shots of the meetings, but some of you, I see some familiar faces of some people who sat in on these meetings. It wasn't the engineers and the landscape architects presenting to Judy's committee and the steering committees. It was a collaboration of continuing upon that community conversation that we saw, that we got out preliminary ideas, and now really searching and looking for opportunities in which we can put them actually on a site plan, so we can start to generate some more discussion as, well, what would this look like on a plan, so we could sort of see limits of what some of these things would look like between Street A or Street B. So what we did very early on was look at the North Branch and the South Branch, pretty much from Hunter's Foundry Road, running through Massmoka and a little bit past the confluence of the North and South Branch down past Brown Street. And we looked at the North Branch all the way up, a little past the Eclipse Mill, and we broke it into manageable segments. What you're seeing right here, and I'll bring you through, I think we picked 4 segments. We developed concepts, schematics, concepts, thumbnail sketches for all the segments. So I think we have about 10 segments that are broken into manageable, tangible pieces. And what you're looking at right here is the South Branch segment. If I can jump over here. This is Hunter's Foundry Road over here with the first little dam. There's actually a little hydraulic grade break. Oh, thank you, Judy. There we go. Hunter's Foundry over here. And this alignment right here is the existing channelized section of the river. In that area, it's actually an earthen berm. One of the initial ideas, even I think it was discussed at the community conversation several years ago, was there's an existing wetland, low-lying area that right now is completely disconnected from the Hoosick River, the South Branch of the Hoosick River, and it's disconnected by an earthen berm. So one of the ideas that we wanted to get on paper was, well, what if we reconnected this wetland system back to the normal flow, or that 90–95% of when we see the trickle running through the South Branch through here, what if we reconnected that and brought that onto the normal flow line, enhanced that wetland, turned it into an educational area, connected it into the recreational, active recreation that's happening in here, looked at extending the trail connection down through into downtown, because we all know that potentially that Ashwaubenon is going to head north out of Adams, so there's going to have to be a logical connection. But again, knowing that we want to keep the flood control intact, this concept simply shows the alignment of the existing channelized South Branch right here could stay. It would stay. Normal flow would be diverted through a much healthier ecosystem down here, but under a flood event, the flood flows would then run through this channel. So these are the types of things that we looked at, and we started to get on paper So as the process moves forward and hopefully eventually into a master plan document, so you actually have a tangible thing, so that if properties become available and if funding sources become available, you can actually go back and look at and go back and see, well, geez, I remember looking at an option like that. Well, what did it look like on paper and what properties were involved? That's why we get to this step. So as you can see, that continues down, and we looked at a bunch of different options. This is the steel recycling center here, and the ability, do we put on paper that says maybe it can be consolidated? Still active, still uses the rail. It's actually a very functional business because of the location of the rail, but are there some opportunities to make it a little bit better? Look at some of the remediation aspects of it. We're sitting in City Hall right here. We know the Route 8 construction has been ongoing for a long time. We also know that some parcels down here, that some of the active redevelopment, other entities within town are looking at potential redevelopment parcels in here. So one of the goals of the committee and our group was to make sure we understood what some of the other redevelopment projects that are going on in the city are and try and incorporate them. And what you see is really trying to reconnect a green space along the river where we know we have constraints. And Jim had talked about, we have the flood walls, and in some areas we don't have the ability to lay back the flood walls and still maintain flood control. But what we do have is the ability to enhance immediately adjacent to the flood wall and really look to continue a linear trail system through here where we have less opportunity to do bigger projects. We do still have opportunities. An interesting area that popped up along our discussion was if you walk out of City Hall and you head down looking into Marshall Street, there's a little parcel here, there's an existing building on it now, and this is something that we hope that people begin to focus on. We've worked on several projects in different areas of New England, and this building right here is now for sale, and it actively functions as almost a hinge to downtown. If you in a planning study or an urban planner's world, it's a very important area. And what we looked at is, if you look at the sections, and Jim had showed a section before, there is a potential to potentially reconnect the public with the river by simply doing some hardscape steps. We know that they will be flooded at certain points, so we tried to find some examples of some of the ideas. So it's still a structural element, able to withstand flooding events, but yet it starts to bring some civic character, civic gathering space ideas into it. And that's really where we are. We honed in on this area as a potential to really be a focal point and a hinge for the downtown area. We have, let's see, River Street. We have the porches right here, Marshall over here, the confluence of the north and the south branch over here, and the Mass MoCA building over here. There currently exists a pretty nice green strip or green band along here with some private properties on the corner. But again, an area where, if you look at the sections down here, we have the large mass of the MoCA building, which really emulates the downtown and the brick masonry. But on the adjacent side, within this parklet, there could be some potential to get pretty dynamic and pretty sort of an urban civic gathering space. And we have these graphics available, and we can point you to the direction where you can look at them in more detail. But again, a structural element, but yet a civic gathering space, and something that's a lot more pedestrian friendly. And that can be also emulated with different landscaping treatments along the sections of the walls that we're going to keep in place. So it's a balancing act of where can we push the limits, where do we have to maintain the structural part of it, but we all know that as the project gets older and older, something will have to be done to the structural elements to either be maintained, restored, or potentially modified. This was one of the last concepts that got developed, and probably the one that, I don't know, I would say garnered the most excitement. And we're now up at the Eclipse Mill, up on the northern extent of the study area, where we have the series of, we have a dam here, we have a dam just northeast of the Eclipse Mill, and right here, under existing conditions, is a large factory building, and then some other existing, there's some residential structures back in this corner, and there's some commercial structures. There's some vacant parcels down through here. One of the ideas was, and if you remember seeing this concept when Jim walked you through it, was, is there a way to bring that low flow back up to street level, we'll call it? And the idea that's illustrated on this concept is to pull water from the elevation of one of the higher dams, pull it off at that elevation, get it to the other side of the street, take down the large factory building, and divert a normal flow or a maintainable flow of water into a created park system on the adjacent side from Eclipse Mill as you come into downtown. It would function as a gateway into the city. Could be the start or the continuance of an Artist Mile or a linear green system all the way downtown. It could provide the benefit and access and potential to access the trails into the state park. Again, a lot of engineering that would have to go into this. Is it feasible? Sure, it's feasible. And these are the things that we started to look at as far as we developed a preliminary ranking system on. We have implementation we know would be extremely high here. But some of the benefits, site would need to be remediated, most likely a contaminated site. The city would benefit from any type of remediation here. This could be constructed in a cap system, so you wouldn't have to get down into the remediation, and those are the details where we're starting to look at right now, but we're trying to consider everything. So when you start to look at graphics like this, the idea is that it starts to generate a little bit more excitement, we hope, and it starts to uncover things that you would never even think of starting to think about unless you put them on paper. And I think that would lead us on to the next steps of the project, where Judy and I just exchanged assessor's mapping, so we can really start to look at properties and some more engineering and things of that nature. So we just wanted to show you 4 of the graphics, what was generated out of this last phase of the study, and look forward to getting into the next phases of the study. So with that, thank you very much.
Okay. In summary, we have a technical report from Jim. We have adopted the same flood protection criteria that the Corps of Engineers had, so whatever we would consider must maintain the same flood protection. We have these drawings, we have descriptions that Mark referred to. We also have a very detailed grid that tells us what the benefits and challenges are for each of these possible choices. As I said, we're going to have citywide meetings for the next 4 or 5 months, and then in the spring we will have a community meeting. So we urge you to get in touch with us, phone, email. Work with us on some of this. It's a lot of fun, and it's very exciting. And we close with this, our favorite phrase: never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And this is from the River Lights. 2,000 people came downtown, 2008. I think it's a great message. So thank you very much. And these are the people who've been working on this. We have a packet for you with some of these slides. It's very expensive to make copies of color slides. So you have what we consider to be the highlights. And now we're here for questions.
Thank you, Judy. Wait, put the lights back on. Questions from council? Council Harpen.
Judy, Mr. Trotter mentioned money and how much this is going to be costing. And so far to date, how much has been spent on this project, and how much, I know you had a fundraiser and things like that, so how much altogether has been spent to date, and how do you plan on getting the rest of the money?
Okay.
And what do you feel the cost is going to be? So you got,
Okay. So far, I would say we've spent $60,000, $70,000, which has been raised or We have received that money from state government, from grants, from individuals, and from businesses. With respect to your second question, what is it going to cost? We're not there yet. Until we really come to agreement on what the city would like to do, it's too early to say. But I have been told that it's easier to raise money when you have drawings. So far, it's been a dream. So I think what we need to remember is that
We got a family
there's,
slideshow going on right now.
oh yeah, my family, okay. All right.
You were doing
Grandkid.
fine until we saw Lefty.
Yeah, is he lefty? Okay, whoops. I don't know how to do this, but anyway.
There you go.
In any case, I don't care. I mean, it's all right. It's too early, Marie, but we certainly are aware of the fact that people have said it will be easier to raise money now that you have drawings. And we know of organizations that have been waiting for us to have drawings, both federal agencies as well as state and individuals. So we'll do it little by little. And so, because I know some people have said, oh, well, the money should be used for other things. There is money in that individuals and foundations and state and federal agencies have that are just for projects like this. We can't feed people with water money. It's just, well, you know enough about government. I don't have to tell you. So it's not like we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. Any other questions?
Counselors? Counselor Bond?
Rough timetable on what your next objectives and your next goals are?
Okay, well, we mentioned that meeting in the spring. Once we have consensus from the community and from our steering committee, we will likely do a pilot project. However, you know better than most, we've got the Partnership for North Adams that is working on revitalizing downtown. There is Develop North Adams that is working on it. The city is working on it. So, but the good news is we are all working together. Many of us are on some of the same committees. So what that next step will be is not, it may not be a pilot project. It may be that we meld with the city and the partnership and we have a master plan for the city and we start doing pilot projects from that. I don't know. We're just, I think the important thing is that we stay in communication with all of these organizations. The important thing also is that we're not held up by them. Because as you can see, we could do some of these without, as long as the city approved, we would not proceed with anything without city council approval. But let's assume we do something in the South Branch, that diversion stream. That could be done even though we may not have a master plan for the city or the partnership hasn't decided what they're going to do. So we're going to be moving along, but we just have to keep in mind that we're a team. We all have the same goal, to revitalize downtown. And so I don't know how it's all going to unfold. But so far it's been good. I mean, we really have all been in touch.
Judy, you mentioned that you'd had fundraisers. Are there plans for more fundraisers in the future that you're aware of?
No, not yet. We're going to go through the next, we will be raising money, I must say. But we haven't, we've been frankly focused on getting through this planning process, putting together this presentation that will now be done across the city. But probably next month, we'll start thinking about raising more money. And even if we don't have something in mind, we're going to need a good chunk of change for a design. So, but I'm delighted to have drawings. And you know, people, when I say to them, this is an idea, they say, that's so much better than my words. And so I know already there are people, I've sort of given a sneak preview to a couple donors. And I know there's interest, so we'll start. You want to work on a fundraiser with us?
The name is fundraiser.
We'll be in touch.